A state trooper pulled over a 62-year-old widow, thinking she'd be easy to intimidate, until her son arrived in uniform, and the silence turned into power. It was just past 6:30 in the evening when Jacqueline Monroe turned off Highway 378 onto a quieter stretch of Route 58, heading back toward her home in Darlington County. The sun was low, bleeding soft gold across the cotton fields. Jacqueline, 62, wore her usual, a patterned blouse, silver hoop earrings, and her late husband's military dog tags tucked under her collar. She drove a 2004 Honda Accord with a worn steering wheel and a back seat full of church pamphlets. That afternoon, she'd visited her sister Corinne in Florence, helped her plant a few tomatoes, laughed about old times, packed her up some cornbread for the week ahead, the kind of day that fills you up without trying. But that feeling began to thin the moment she noticed the cruiser behind her. At first, she thought nothing of it. Everyone gets followed now and then. But when the patrol car stayed on her for more than a few miles, mirroring every turn, creeping closer, her fingers tightened on the wheel. No lights yet, no siren, just a shadow trailing behind. She glanced into the mirror. The man behind the wheel wore sunglasses, even though the sun was nearly gone. His jaw didn't move. He was watching. Jacqueline signaled and pulled over to the shoulder as the cruiser suddenly flared its lights. She turned the engine off, placed her hands on the wheel, sat still. The officer didn't approach immediately. He lingered by his car, radioing something in. When he finally stepped forward, he walked slowly, like someone entering a situation he already didn't trust. His boots crunched the gravel deliberately. Jacqueline rolled the window down halfway. "License and registration," he said flatly. No greeting, no reason given. She reached into her glove box with deliberate movements, speaking her actions aloud like she'd been taught. "My license is in my wallet, registration in the glove box. I'm reaching now." The officer didn't respond, just watched. She handed over the documents. He looked at them for all of 2 seconds before flicking his eyes back to her. "You from around here? I live in Darlington County. What brings you out here tonight?" "I was visiting my sister in Florence. Just headed home." "You take this road often?" She blinked. "Sir, is there a reason you pulled me over?" His eyes narrowed. "You crossed the center line back there." Jacqueline didn't flinch. "I didn't feel my tires cross. But if you say I did, you did." He let the silence hang, like he was daring her to challenge it. She didn't. Instead, she asked, "May I know your name, officer?" He didn't answer that either. Instead, he took 2 steps back and said, "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Her heartbeat didn't rise, but her jaw set slightly. For what reason? "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." She took a deep breath, her fingers still on the wheel. "I haven't done anything wrong. Am I under arrest?" "Don't play games with me. Out of the car. Now." She glanced in the mirror again. Nothing but open fields on either side. No houses, no headlights. Still, she unbuckled. Slowly, opened the door. Stepped out. He circled her car, inspecting it like he was hoping it would offer him something. A reason. A mistake. Anything. "Where's your destination again?" he repeated. "Home. Darlington. How long were you with your sister?" "Since lunchtime." "You drive this car often?" "It's mine." He gave a slight smirk, almost like he thought she was lying. "Mind if I take a look inside?" "I do mind." "Excuse me?" "I don't consent to a search." His posture changed then. Tightened. He wasn't used to pushback, especially not from someone like her. "I can get a canine unit down here." Jacqueline folded her arms. "You can, but not without cause." He stared at her, jaw locked. She didn't blink, but something in Jacqueline's expression told a different story. She'd been here before, and this time, she wasn't alone. The officer's stance shifted. He took a half-step closer, his hand brushing against the radio on his vest, like he wanted to remind her, and maybe himself, that he held the authority out here, on a stretch of empty road where cornfields were taller than the stop signs. Jacqueline remained still. Her hands were clasped in front of her, not in fear, but in quiet calculation. She had been taught long ago that certain moments in life were not about winning. They were about surviving. "You got something in that trunk you don't want me to see?" the officer asked, voice lowered like he was trying to bait her into saying the wrong thing. "No, sir." "Then why not let me take a look?" "Because you haven't told me what I did wrong. I told you already. You crossed the center line." She exhaled through her nose, slow and deliberate. "That doesn't give you the right to search my car." The officer didn't respond right away. He just stood there, eyes locked on hers like they were having two conversations at once, one spoken, one not. He took a step toward the rear of her car, looking down at her plates. "You had this vehicle registered in 2021? "Yes." "Seems like the tags are about to expire." "They're good until the end of the month." "Well, today's the 27th. "Then they're still valid." He didn't like that answer. His jaw clenched. Not in anger, something more frustrating, like he was chasing a reason to escalate and kept finding none. Without asking, he walked back toward the driver's side and peered through the window. Jacqueline's purse sat on the passenger seat. A peach from her sister's garden rolled slightly in the bag as the car rocked gently from the breeze. He rattled the door handle. She raised her voice just enough. "I did not give you permission to open my door." He turned. "Do you have something illegal in there?" "No? Then what's the issue?" She didn't answer that. He exhaled sharply. "You know, I could write you up for obstruction." Jacqueline met his stare. "You could try." That stopped him. A few seconds passed. She turned slightly, as if the weight of the moment was beginning to settle in. Her voice softened. "Officer, I'm not trying to be difficult, but I know my rights. You're asking for more than you're owed." He stared at her like he didn't expect a woman like her to say something like that. "I'm going to call someone," she said quietly. "Not to interfere, just to document what's happening." He raised his eyebrows, a little amused. "Sure, you do that." She reached into her pocket slowly, calmly, pulled out an older model flip phone, one her son had begged her to upgrade months ago. She'd refused, said it did what she needed. She dialed without looking. 1 ring. 2. "Chris," she said. "It's Mama. I'm pulled over on Route 58, near Timmonsville. Can you come?" The officer chuckled. "What is he, a lawyer or something?" She paused. "Something like that." He shook his head, turning away like he thought the situation had peaked. She shut the phone and put it back in her pocket. The sky had turned deep orange now. Long shadows stretched across the pavement. In the distance, a semi-truck passed without slowing, its wheels sending up small gusts of grit. Jacqueline returned to standing beside her car, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady. The officer stood a few feet away, arms crossed. His smirk had faded. He kept glancing toward the highway, every few seconds now. "You called your son to come help?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "He local?" "He's not far." "He a cop?" Jacqueline didn't respond. Instead, she looked back at him with the same calm expression she had carried since the moment this started. The kind of look that wasn't born yesterday, but built over decades. But as his hand hovered near his holster and the weight of silence returned, he had no idea that help wasn't just on the way. It was about to change everything. 10 minutes on that road felt like 20. Jacqueline leaned against the passenger side of her car, watching the officer pace. Small steps. Tight circle. He didn't speak. He just kept checking his watch, and then glancing down the highway, then back at her. Still no apology. Still no explanation. Jacqueline could see the agitation bubbling under his skin. This wasn't how these situations were supposed to go. Not in his mind. Not with someone like her who hadn't raised her voice, hadn't cracked, hadn't run, and now she had the nerve to call for backup? The trooper looked up when he heard it. Not sirens, no roaring engine, just a quiet hum from an approaching black SUV, sleek and clean, rolling smooth like it didn't belong on a country road. The SUV slowed beside the shoulder, stopped. The door opened. Out stepped a man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in army service uniform. Not dress blues, but formal enough to make a statement. badges on the chest, silver insignias that caught the last bit of daylight. No hesitation in his step. Major Christopher Monroe, Jacqueline's only son. The trooper straightened reflexively, like a kid who just got caught skipping class. His eyes darted from the uniform to the name tag. His lips parted, but no words came out. Jacqueline stayed where she was, didn't even shift her weight. Christopher walked directly toward the officer. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Good evening, sir. I'm Major Monroe, U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. I received a call from my mother. This is her vehicle. May I ask what the stop is about?" The officer swallowed. Hard. She was swerving. I thought it best to check things out. Christopher's expression didn't change. "You thought it best to detain a 62-year-old woman on her way home from visiting family and ask to search her vehicle without a warrant?" "I didn't detain her. She stepped out willingly. Did you inform her she had a choice?" The officer hesitated. "I was getting to that." Christopher looked toward his mother. She gave a single nod, the kind that said, "I'm okay, but don't let this slide." He turned back. "Do you have a dashcam recording of the moment you claim she crossed the line?" I'd have to check the footage." "Then I suggest you do." The trooper opened his mouth, then closed it again. His entire posture had changed, shoulders drawn in, hands awkwardly resting near his belt, like he was looking for somewhere to anchor them. Christopher walked to the side of the car, glanced in the window, then back at the officer. "I see nothing in plain view to suggest probable cause. You requested to search her vehicle, correct?" "Yes." "Was consent granted?" "No." "Then you had no right to touch the door handle. Do you understand that?" "I was just—" "Do you understand that?" The officer looked down. Yes, Jacqueline had said almost nothing the entire time. But she didn't need to. Every word from her son filled the space she had deliberately left open. Christopher took a slow breath. This kind of conduct is exactly why the JAG Corps works hand in hand with civilian oversight. Because this right here, this is where trust dies. The officer shifted his feet. "Look, I didn't mean to—" Christopher raised a hand, not to threaten, just to stop the noise. "Don't explain. Reflect. Because in about 20 minutes this incident will be on record. And if your footage conveniently malfunctions, I assure you my mother's phone didn't." The officer glanced at Jacqueline's car, then back at her. "You didn't say who your son was," she finally spoke. "You didn't ask." But Christopher hadn't come just to check on his mother. He came to remind the man in uniform that respect doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing when you're wrong and what you choose to do next. The wind picked up slightly as Christopher stepped closer to his mother, the gravel crunching under his polished black shoes. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder. No words, just presence. She didn't flinch. She didn't need comforting. She needed him there. And now he was. The trooper lingered beside his cruiser, eyes darting between mother and son, the realization still settling in like cold rain soaking through thin fabric. He wasn't dealing with some scared, uninformed woman anymore. He had underestimated the quiet strength of Jacqueline Monroe. And now he was face to face with the man she raised. Christopher turned to him again. "Officer, do you have a supervisor I can speak with?" "I can call dispatch." "Then I suggest you do. Now." The officer didn't argue. He stepped back to his vehicle, radioed in a request for his sergeant. His voice, once dry and condescending, was now clipped and unsure. Christopher glanced back at his mother. "You all right?" She gave a faint smile. "Just tired." He nodded. "I'll handle the rest." She leaned back against her car, watching. Still silent. Still composed. A few minutes later, a second cruiser arrived. This one carried Sergeant Alan Devers, a man who looked like he had seen enough roadside calls to know when things were already spiraling. He stepped out, adjusted his belt, and walked over briskly. Christopher met him halfway. "Sergeant, I'm Major Christopher Monroe, JAG Corps. Your officer here pulled my mother over, made contact without informing her of the reason, attempted to search her vehicle without consent, and, according to her, placed his hand on the door handle despite being denied permission. Diva's expression didn't change, but his jaw moved slightly as he assessed the situation. "I'm just trying to understand what happened here," Divas said carefully. "Do you mind if I speak with you and the officer together?" Christopher nodded once. "That's fine, but just so we're clear, this isn't going away with a handshake." They walked a few feet away, out of earshot from Jacqueline, though she watched closely. The conversation was calm, quiet, but from body language alone, the tone was clear. Divas was listening. The trooper was fidgeting. Back by the car, Jacqueline shifted her weight. Her phone buzzed in her purse, but she didn't answer. She knew what people would say. Her friends from church, her neighbor who always watched the news with his coffee, even the cashier at the corner store who once confided she'd been stopped twice in 1 month just for driving to work after dark. They would all want to hear what happened, not because it was rare, but because it was too familiar. After a few minutes, Christopher returned to her side. "They're going to run a full review," he said. "Internal Affairs will get the footage, and I'm writing my own report. I'll make sure it doesn't get lost in a drawer." Jacqueline nodded. "Thank you. You shouldn't have had to call me." "I know," she replied. "But I did." That was all they needed to say. Sergeant Divas walked over and, for the first time, directly addressed Jacqueline. "Ma'am," he said, his tone respectful and low. "We're going to follow up on this. I'm sorry for how this interaction played out." She didn't smile. She didn't soften. She just said, "Thank you for showing up." Divas looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. He turned and walked back to his cruiser. The first trooper lingered near his vehicle, head low, not looking at either of them. He knew what the shift in tone meant, knew it wouldn't be swept aside like the other stops. Not this time. Christopher looked at his mother. "Want me to drive?" "No," she said, walking around to the driver's side. "I've had enough taken from me today. I'll keep this one." She slid back behind the wheel, adjusted the mirror. Christopher walked to his SUV but didn't leave. Not yet. But as Jacqueline merged back onto Route 58, the rearview mirror didn't just reflect her son's car. It held something heavier. The weight of a moment that could have gone very differently, and the strength it took to keep it from becoming another name on the news. By the next morning, the story had already started to ripple through town, not because someone posted it online, yet, but because someone saw the SUV. Another person saw the uniform. A third heard the way the sergeant apologized. And in small towns like Timmonsville, details don't take long to travel. They stretch across porches, flow through barber shops, and sneak into Sunday morning pews long before a reporter ever hears a word. Jacqueline didn't go to Facebook. She didn't tweet. She didn't write a post calling for justice. She watered her porch plants, folded laundry, baked her cornbread like she did every Thursday. But that didn't stop people from calling. Her friend Eula from the library. "I heard about what happened. You all right, Jackie?" Her cousin Leon. "Girl, I know Chris showed up and shut that mess down, didn't he?" Even Pastor Reeves, with his deep voice and careful pauses. "We'd love to have you speak at Sunday's community meeting. Doesn't have to be long, just a few words." She politely declined. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she needed time to decide how she wanted to say it. Christopher, meanwhile, wasn't quiet. That same day he filed a formal complaint, backed with the date, time, and a time-stamped phone log of the moment his mother called. He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't demand a firing. He simply wrote the truth, detail by detail, and let the facts do the work. 2 days later, the officer in question was placed on administrative leave pending review. That's when the phone calls really started. A young black teacher from Bishopville called Christopher. "I've had students scared of the police. Can you come speak to them?" An older white woman called Jacqueline, voice shaking. "I was behind you when it happened. I saw how he talked to you. I didn't know what to do. I'm sorry I didn't stop." People weren't just talking. They were waking up. Waking up to how quickly respect can vanish when someone thinks no one important is watching. And how differently that situation might have gone if Jacqueline had been someone else. Someone without a son in uniform, without the quiet strength to hold her ground. On Saturday evening, She finally agreed to speak at the community gathering. It wasn't in a courthouse or a school auditorium. It was in the multi-purpose room of her church, folding chairs in rows, sweet tea on a side table, and a microphone that squealed every few minutes. The room was full. Black families, white families, young couples, retirees, all of them sitting in quiet curiosity, waiting to hear from the woman whose story had stirred the dust. Jacqueline didn't write anything down. She stood slowly, adjusted the microphone once, and spoke like she was talking across her kitchen table. "I didn't come here to be angry," she said. "I came here because I was reminded, again, that even when you do everything right, it's not always enough." She looked around the room, pausing between thoughts. "I was polite. I was calm. I answered every question. And still, that officer didn't see me. Not as a mother, not as a woman, not as a person. Just a problem to control." A few people nodded, quietly. "But you know what changed the moment my son pulled up? It wasn't his voice. It wasn't his height or his muscles. It was that uniform. That badge. That title. That was the price of being treated like I mattered." Her eyes scanned the room. "That should bother all of us." She ended it there. No long speech, no dramatic close. Just the truth, laid out like laundry on a line. Plain, honest, undeniable. After the meeting, people lined up to shake her hand. Some hugged her. Others simply said, "Thank you." Not for what she'd been through, but for not staying quiet about it. But while the crowd slowly thinned and the room emptied out, Jacqueline didn't feel vindicated. She felt tired, because she knew too many people who wouldn't have made it home to tell the story at all. The following week, life didn't go back to normal. Not exactly. Jacqueline still went to her morning walks at the park near Prestwood Lake. She still picked up groceries at the IGA on 5th Street and mailed cards to her grandchildren in Beaufort. But there was a shift in how people looked at her now, like they finally saw something that had always been there. Some smiled differently. Others lowered their eyes. A few looked her in the face for the first time in years. But Jacqueline didn't care for the attention. She hadn't asked for it. What mattered to her was that things moved. Conversations that used to get shut down now lingered. People asked real questions at town meetings. A few local officials even pushed for officers to undergo additional bias training. It wasn't a revolution, but it was motion. Christopher visited more often now, not because he didn't trust the world around his mother, but because he wanted to witness how she handled it. He had always respected her, but seeing her stand there on that road, unshaken, had left a mark on him deeper than any battlefield briefing ever had. One afternoon, the two of them sat on her back porch. The cicadas were humming, and a pitcher of lemonade sat sweating on the table between them. "I've been thinking," Christopher said, "about everything that happened." Jacqueline leaned back in her chair. "That makes two of us. I can't stop wondering. What if I hadn't picked up that call?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out across her small backyard at the plastic pinwheel stuck in the flower bed that spun when the wind picked up. "That officer didn't expect anyone to show up," she finally said. "Especially not someone in a position of power. He thought I'd fold, that I'd panic. But I didn't call you to save me, Chris. I called you so there'd be a witness." He looked at her, almost surprised. "I know how these stories go," she continued. "But that day, I wanted someone there who knew how to tell it right if it went bad." She wasn't exaggerating. She wasn't being dramatic. She was speaking from a place deeper than fear, somewhere history had carved into her over decades. Christopher exhaled, his eyes on the peeling paint of the porch rail. "I'm proud of you, Mama." She gave a small laugh. "You better be. I taught you everything you know." He grinned, and they shared a long moment of silence, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. In the weeks that followed, Jacqueline received a letter from the South Carolina Department of Public Safety. It was formal, as expected, apologizing for the inconvenience she endured. They mentioned corrective action, though the letter was vague on specifics. She didn't expect more, but that wasn't the end of it. A young reporter from Columbia heard about the incident and reached out. She wanted to do a profile on Jacqueline. Not because of the stop, she said, but because of how you handled it. Jacqueline agreed, on one condition. If you write about me, write about all the others too. The ones without uniforms in their family. The ones who still don't make it home. The article came out a week later. The headline read, "The Strength of Silence, How a Mother Changed the Conversation in Timmonsville." People shared it, not because it was sensational, but because it was real. At church that Sunday, Pastor Reeves asked Jacqueline to come to the front again. She didn't. "I appreciate it," she said from her seat. "But today I just want to listen." He nodded and moved on. But even without standing up, Jacqueline had already made her voice heard, and this time people were finally ready to listen. It was a quiet Thursday when Christopher came by again. No meeting, no reporters, no town business. Just 2 lawn chairs, a bowl of fresh fruit, and a mother and son catching a breath after weeks that felt like they'd stretched the year thin. The sun hung lower than usual, casting a soft orange on the porch floorboards. Jacqueline had wrapped herself in a light shawl. The air wasn't cold, but she liked the weight of it, like memory settling on her shoulders. "I've been thinking about Daddy a lot," Christopher said, slicing into a peach. Jacqueline didn't look at him, just nodded slowly. "He always used to say, if you want to know a man's character, watch how he treats people who can't fight back." "He sure did," she said. "Every Sunday afternoon when you were acting up at the diner." They both smiled, the memory folding itself back in place like a page in an old book. "I keep going back to that moment on the road," he said, "and I keep wondering, how many times does that play out across this country without someone showing up?" Jacqueline exhaled, not out of sorrow, but because she understood the weight behind the question. "I think about it too," she said. "And I think about all the mothers who don't get to make that phone call, the ones who have to bury their boys, or the ones who never get to explain why they kept their hands on the wheel and didn't speak." She looked him in the eye. "There's no rule book for surviving moments like that. Just instinct. And experience." He set the peach aside, wiped his hands on a napkin, and leaned forward. "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't break down. You didn't beg. You just stood there." Jacqueline smiled gently. "Sometimes quiet is all you have. And if you know how to use it right, it speaks louder than any threat." She turned her head toward the road, where cars passed lazily every few minutes. "That officer didn't know who I was, didn't care. But maybe now he'll think twice before treating another woman like a suspect before a person." Christopher nodded. "You think it made a difference?" She didn't answer right away. "Maybe not to everyone," she finally said. "But to someone, yes, and that's enough. The world wouldn't change overnight." She knew that. But maybe, just maybe, that officer would approach the next car a little differently. Maybe someone who read her story would find the courage to speak up, or to listen, or to just stay put and refuse to be erased. And maybe someone, somewhere, would remember the name Jacqueline Monroe, not because of a protest or a viral clip, but because of how she carried herself when it mattered most. As the sky deepened to dusk, Christopher rose to leave. He bent down to kiss her forehead. "I love you, Mama." She grinned. "I know. Go make dinner. You ain't too grown to starve." They both laughed, and with that, he stepped off the porch and into his SUV. As he drove away, Jacqueline stayed seated, rocking slowly. No spotlight, no ceremony. Just a woman on her porch, holding her ground the same way she had all her life. Steady, quiet, and unshaken. There's a lesson in Jacqueline's story. Sometimes justice doesn't come with flashing lights or loud voices. Sometimes it shows up in a uniform, yes, but more often it shows up in how we stand, how we wait, how we refuse to be dismissed. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not let someone change who you are just to be seen. If this story moved you, share it. Not for outrage, but for remembrance, for awareness, for strength. Subscribe to hear more stories that remind us what real dignity looks like, especially when the world forgets.